So first, I'd like to welcome everyone. It's very exciting to have everyone here tonight live on Zoom. Thank you for attending tonight's book launch featuring Bruce Meyer's latest collection of short stories called Toast Soldiers, published by Crownsest Books. There's actually quite a few more people coming into the waiting room, so I'm gonna just wait one more second and let a few more people join. So once again, thank you so much everyone for joining us here at the book launch of Bruce's book of short stories called Toast Soldiers, published by Crownsest Books. It's a pleasure to be here celebrating Bruce Meyer's accomplishments as a writer and his newest collection of stories. Okay, first, let me introduce myself. My name is Julianne Russo, and I will be co-hosting tonight's event alongside Abby Coutinho. But just before we dive into our exciting evening, I would like to start with tonight's agenda. So get cozy, sit back and relax. First, Abby's going to go over a few brief administrative notes for tonight's evening, as well as highlight some fantastic giveaways we have planned. This will be followed by some remarkable guest speakers, two men who have worked closely with Bruce Meyer and will be providing insight into Bruce's work. After that, we have prepared a video compilation including several authors. Many of them are here today. And they will be discussing Bruce's work and the prolific impact he's had on the Canadian literary scene. Finally, we will hear from the author of the hour, Bruce, as he reads excerpts from Toast Soldiers, and we will conclude our night by opening the floor to our audience for questions. So please save your questions to share at the end of the program. And now I'll turn things over to our co-host. Please welcome Abby Coutinho.
Thank you, Julianne. As mentioned earlier, my name is Abby, and I am thrilled to be co-hosting this amazing event. So before we continue, I would like to go over some brief notes about our event tonight. Firstly, we graciously ask that you turn your cameras on to create a more communal atmosphere and make it more enjoyable for everybody. You don't have to, we won't force you, but it makes it more fun. Along with this, we also ask that you keep yourselves on mute to ensure sound quality. If you're unsure about where to find those applications in your Zoom, I've highlighted it here. It should be on the bottom row of your computer. We will also be announcing the winners of our giveaways. So we have two different giveaways prepared for you all. Firstly is our Eventbrite giveaway, which will include two lucky winners who will receive a signed copy of Toast Soldiers. To be eligible for this giveaway, you must have registered ahead of time with our Eventbrite link. But don't fret, if you haven't registered ahead of time, you still have a chance to win. 3 lucky audience members here with us today will also be picked to also win a signed copy of Toast Soldiers. The 5 winners will be picked and announced later in the evening, and we will be connecting with you privately to receive your prize. Now, if you don't win, do not worry. We also have a fantastic deal going on right now, so you can purchase your own copy of Toast Soldiers for 50% off. Yes, you heard that right, half off. This incredible deal is only valid for the next 24 hours if you go to Crownsest Books website. The link will be posted very soon in the chat. If you missed your chance to redeem this offer, we still have you covered with 25% off for the next 2 weeks, also valid on Crownsest Books website. We will be posting reminders of this amazing offer throughout the night in the chat, so keep an eye out for that. And without further ado, I will pass things along to Julianne to introduce our first guest speaker and get our night rolling along.
Yes, thank you, Abby. Tonight, our first guest speaker has worked closely with Bruce Meyer on this project as the primary editor. He is a publisher and editor with an academic background in literature, political science, and philosophy. The co-founder of Crownsest Books, he is originally from Edmonton, Canada, and currently lives in the greater Chicago area. Please welcome our first speaker, Louis Slosky.
Thank you very much, Julianne, and thanks to Abby. It's a pleasure to be here. Welcome to all of you. My name is indeed Louis Slosky, and I'm the co-founder of Crownsest Books, the very proud publisher of the present work, Toast Soldiers by Bruce Meyer. Hello, Bruce. A word quickly about how we came to sign Bruce on this book. Crownsest, as a publishing house, is dedicated to building a space for ideas-based and fine literary fiction. And we had published an excellent work that fit the bill, a novel in stories that tells a future history of the city of Toronto called What We See in the Smoke, written by Ben Gaughan, who's also here tonight. Unbeknownst to us at the time, Ben had been a student of Bruce. And when Bruce needed a new publisher for his prose, Ben sent him to us. And all of a sudden, Crownsest had yet another reason to be grateful to Ben Gaughan, the first being his own writing, of course. And then we had cause to be grateful to Bruce too. From an editor's perspective, Bruce is a wonderful person to work with. He cares deeply about his writing, and he works assiduously with you to make sure that everything is perfect. I also believe that Bruce sometimes sleeps, but not at the same times as most of us, unless we happen to be in the Beijing, Hong Kong, Singapore time zone while he is in Ontario. You can work late, say until 1 a.m., and send Bruce a round of edits, and you might very well get it back 2 hours later. And Bruce is a lovely, kind-hearted man, but even at that, his greatest excellence is in his writing, and that's why we're here tonight. Toast Soldiers is a remarkable book. We were eager to publish it as soon as we read the manuscript. And there is a kind of unity to the many stories that it contains. Most or all of those stories present human beings who find themselves in difficult, painful, sometimes tragic, and often absurd circumstances. And Bruce, who has a graceful pen, portrays these hard and strange circumstances with a dreamlike and ethereal quality. This is already a significant accomplishment, rendering the hardships and adversities that human beings face as things of beauty. But the truly redeeming aspect of the world of Toast Soldiers lies in the people themselves, in their determination and their merit. The people of Toast Soldiers are not nihilists. They might face a brief and strange life marked by struggle, but they do so with tremendous dignity. And so, Toast Soldiers is an important book to read, because it reminds us all, in the midst of this changing and often hostile world, of the integrity of our desires and the value of the posture we adopt as we pursue them. It is a privilege for Crownsest to publish such a work. Back to the hosts.
Thank you, Louis. So introducing our next guest speaker, he is the author of an array of poetry and nonfiction books, a well-known name in the Canadian publishing industry, and a close friend of Bruce. Founder of Black Moss Press, he was named the Poet Laureate of Windsor in 2011 and served in that role until 2019, when he was declared the Poet Laureate Emeritus. In 2012, he introduced what has become the most popular literary event in the area, Poetry at the Manor, in which poets from around the country attend to recite their poetry to a large and eager audience at the Willisstead Manor in Windsor. It is my absolute honor to introduce our next guest speaker, Marty Gervais.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Abby. Appreciate that. And it's my pleasure to say a few words about Bruce Meyer. He's someone I've known for several decades. I heard about him many years ago from the legendary poet Gwen McEwen. She was the winner of the Governor General's Award, and she was someone who was in Windsor to do a reading. And I was having coffee with her that night, and she told me that I should consider publishing a new and exciting young poet, and I took her at her word, and that led me to publishing Bruce Meyer's first book, The Open Room, and that was in 1989. And since then, I've published countless works of his, both poetry and nonfiction, and I've also joined him on stage where we shared our writing. And once we actually rode a train together, courtesy of Via Rail, to bring poetry to passengers in the Windsor, Ottawa route or corridor. And I brought him to Windsor to appear at Poetry at the Manor, as Abby says, one of the most popular poetry events in Canada. It brings poets laureate from all over the country to Windsor. And Bruce Meyer's work, his poetry and his stories, they explore areas of writing that surprise and dazzle. I call him a magician with words. And it's because of the way in which he tells a story. You wind up doing a double take because the narratives come alive in the most revealing and inexplicable way. He has a way of seeing the world where it's almost as if he regards it as opportunities of ideas and images. And he's like a little kid, the way he dances about which choice he should make when he really wants it all. And what he wants is to embrace the entire world of creativity. And he does. He's wise and he's a cherished soul and someone who makes us see the impossible, makes us see the extraordinary in the most ordinary of things. And if you want to know him, read his work. Bruce Meyer understands language in the grace that inherits art. I had the distinct pleasure once of going to Barrie, and he had asked me to come to one of his classes, and I got there early, and he said to me, would you just go and have a coffee? I'm going to go teach this other class. It was a class in romantics. And I said, well, maybe I could sit in and listen to you. And he said, well, sure, go ahead. And I saw him at the front of the room. All the students were waiting, and he was flipping through his briefcase and papers on the desk. And it was like delay. And I was wondering what was going on. In any case, he finally began to talk about a poem that we all know, Ode to a Grecian Urn by John Keats. And he started reciting the poem for memory and actually pausing over particular lines, pointing out a slight bit of awkwardness in the phrasing and pointing out that John Keats had a struggle at the end of his life with he was dying of tuberculosis, and he pointed that out. And he said, if you look at or hear the awkwardness, it's John Keats coughing, and the lines, if you read them, echo the poet's every every subtle bit of stumbling. And I was stunned when I heard this lecture, only to figure out afterwards all this shuffling around with papers was because Bruce had lost or misplaced or forgotten his lecture, and he was apologizing to me afterwards, saying he had forgotten his notes to the class. But it was the most incredible lecture on romantics that I'd ever heard. And but this is someone who appreciates writing, who digs a little bit deeper into it. And I think Bruce Meyer is a treasure, and we have to keep him, and we have to keep buying his books. So back to you, Abby or Julianne.
Yep, I'll take it from here. Thank you so much, Marty. It's always wonderful to hear you speak of the different authors that you've met over the years. So next, we would like to share with you a little teaser video that features several authors speaking about Bruce Meyer as an author. They detail their experiences reading Bruce's work and honor his legacy as a Canadian writer. So let's see what they have to say. Let me cue this up. Okay, without further ado.
Bruce Meyer is a magician with words. When you read what he has written, you do a double take. You can't quite believe what you are reading, what you are seeing. You don't realize at first that you are being dazzled, but when it settles in your mind that what he has fashioned with images and with storytelling, it makes you smile and it makes you think, this is good.
Hi everyone, happy launch day for Bruce Meyer's Toast Soldiers, a new collection of short stories. I'm Antonia. I'm the author of the poetry collection To Make a Bridge. That collection was actually edited by Bruce Meyer himself. And while it was such a pleasure to work with Bruce as an editor, we've actually known each other for quite a while now, for several years. We met at U of T. He was my professor for creative writing and poetry.
Hello, my name is Ben Birmingham. I'm the author of What We See in the Smoke and Visitation Seats. I first met Bruce in 2015. He was the first undergraduate course that I ever took, was walking into a room and hearing him describe how to write an essay.
My name is Rosanna Michelata Battigelli, and I am a writer and admirer of Bruce's many, many works. I read the entire book and the manuscript and was completely mesmerized from beginning to end.
I thought this was a really beautiful, and from my experience of Bruce's prose, a very different kind of book, in that there are these haunting regrets for the way the past has unfolded within Toast Soldiers, which is captured really beautifully by Bruce, but also with a lot of love and weaving throughout different decades in these snapshots of a Canada that I certainly don't remember, but I know was once there.
I feel like I'm always learning from his writing craft. Bruce has this amazing ability to transform everyday moments, everyday objects, familiar situations, and he transforms them into magical and spiritual experiences that really confront who we are as humans and where we're going and what we're trying to do on this earth.
In one of Bruce's previous books, he wrote, "Life is a brush with divinity." And I found that his stories in Toast Soldiers exquisitely evoke not only the complexities of the human experience with its tribulations and triumphs, passions and perils, but they also touch upon the divine, those soul-lifting moments of life, the magic, the mystery.
I found that Toast Soldiers was a book for those looking for some kind of Canadiana, perhaps not the same, but akin to the aesthetics of Alice Munro's Lives of Girls and Women. There was this is a soft and quiet collection of stories. I would think that anyone trying, especially I'm speaking from Toronto, of people trying to reach outside of their metropolitan lives, but also for anyone yearning to have any kind of insight into a past of Canada and a sort of regretful consequence from the era of the world wars on through to a Canada that doesn't quite know what it's becoming.
Anybody can enjoy this collection. It will pull at your heartstrings. It will draw you in. It will make you cry. It will make you smile. So, you read a book because you want it to move you in some way. Well, this book moves you in seismic ways.
All of his writing shows us what language can do and how it can help us find ourselves.
When I met him, I was 18. I walked into a room and he had like a bow tie and a stack of books. He was already waving a ruler and shouting, and we're still friends, but that's my strongest memory of him.
Hi, I'm Marty Gervais. You should read Bruce Meyer. You should buy his book.
That was a great video. Thank you, Julianne, for putting that all together. Now, before we introduce our honored author, we will pick 2 winners for our Eventbrite giveaway. I have all the names of those who registered ahead of time, and the names that were chosen, I chose during the video, are Anne Kirkland and Eugene Masonette. So congrats to Eugene and Anne. You will both be receiving a signed copy of Bruce Meyer's Toast Soldiers. We will be emailing you shortly after the event concludes today to get some information so it can be shipped out to you very soon. Again, congrats and happy reading. Now, for the moment we have all been waiting for, the reason we are virtually gathered here today, I would like to introduce Bruce Meyer. A little bit about him. He has authored over 64 books of poetry, short stories, and nonfiction. He currently resides in Barrie, Ontario, where he previously served as the inaugural Poet Laureate from 2010 to 2014, and currently is a professor of writing and communications at Georgian College. He was recently a finalist for the Bath Short Story Award and a runner-up for the Bannister Poetry Competition. Please give a warm welcome to Bruce Meyer.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Abby, and thank you, Julianne, for putting this evening together. And I'm delighted to see so many of you here. It's like people I've known throughout my life have suddenly shown up. I want to thank, first of all, I want to thank Louis Slosky, who is my editor and publisher at Crownsest Books. I thought I was the only person that was up at that particular hour. It's about 3 or 4 in the morning, the night before last, and a message came in from Louis, and I said, "Are you still up?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Oh my goodness, it's true." I said, "We're both, nocturnal and so forth." So, anyways, I want to thank Louis Slosky. He's been absolutely wonderful to work with. I want to thank Marty Gervais. I have known Marty for, I won't say how long, but we go way back. And Marty is someone who I respect tremendously for his creativity and his power to bring people together in Windsor, and also to have had the chance to work on his book as an editor has been quite a lot of fun, and it's been an amazing experience. There's a new book that I'm working on right now of Marty's. I'm just about to write the introduction to it, so I'm delighted about that. I want to thank Ben Gann and Antonia Facciponte, who were both students of mine. Every now and then a student comes along and they suddenly they decide that they've got the wherewithal to write, the desire to write. I noticed just looking at the screen tonight, Tracy Sands is here, and Bev Wicks is here. They were also students of mine, and I am delighted to see you. So good evening to you both. These are writers you're going to be hearing from, especially Ben, and but also Tracy and Bev. You'll be hearing from them in the near future. I'm certain of it. Congratulations to Anne Kirkland, who used to run Classical Pursuits, and showed up in the summer to talk to her groups and so forth. They have these wonderful week-long events at St. Michael's College. And I also want to thank Rosanna Mistelota Batagelli. Rosanna sort of came to my rescue. I mean, she's someone who many years ago I met at a reading in Sudbury, and she said, "Oh, how do you get started as a writer?" And we started talking about writing and things you needed to know and things you needed to do. And and then suddenly, lately, her work has just taken off. Her novel, La Brigantenza, and also the short story book Pigeon Soup has done really well, and I'm very pleased to see her success. I should mention also my former co-author from very early on, who we used to go and interview people all over the place. That's Brian O'Riordan. He's here online tonight, so nice to see Brian again. And there's people here from high school, there's people here from that I've taught at various places along my journey, and people I've gotten to know and so forth. So it's it's an amazing to see you all. So I'm grateful that you are here. And last but not least, I certainly want to thank Abby Coutinho and Julianne Russo. Now, I got to know both of them last year when Marty's class in publishing practicum at the University of Windsor decided to produce a book of poems of mine titled Grace of Falling Stars. And I know I drove Abby right out of her mind with my Sphinx-like questions about, where is there no time and so forth, and some of the riddles that were essential to the nature of understanding what the book was all about. And also the Julianne Russo, I met her during the production end of the videos for the launch, and I got to know them both, and they're tremendous at what they do. So I am delighted to see them here, and I want to thank them for their role tonight. So the first story I want to read to you from is an excerpt from, or just the beginning of a short story, which is titled Toast Soldiers. It's the title story from the book. And Lewis suggested that we open the book with it. Here we go. This is the opening of Toast Soldiers. And I should add, before we start rolling with the video that accompanies this, many years ago when I was living in England, I used to go around with friends of mine, and we would visit some of the seniors' residences in England. Very, very different than any seniors' residence here in Canada. But this story is set in a seniors' residence that is mainly full of former soldiers, and the soldiers that are part of were part of a bridge group of four soldiers. Were part of the market garden. Here is Toast Soldiers, the opening of it. Old soldiers do die, and when Toby's passing left the bridge quartet a man short, so only Keith, Mortimer, and Morrison remained of the four directions. Keith could not tell Mortimer from Morrison, though they were all veterans of the market garden fiasco in Holland. What made matters even more confusing for Keith was that Mortimer and Morrison, both bald, bespectacled, and togged in navy cardigans and white shirts, kept switching places between East and West. Keith sat dejectedly at the dinner table the night Toby died. Toby had been the most faithful of friends, someone who he could rely on, someone whose eyes he could read, and who never betrayed a secret from the past. Toby's empty chair reminded Keith of the horror of watching Oxley fall from the underside of the Wall Bridge in Nijmegen. Having Toby with him in the elder home meant Keith was not alone with his memories. Both had been part of the XXX Corps. When the two flirted with the women in the residence, they weren't lying when they claimed that they were XXX. It was a soldier's joke that masked the nightmare the two shared. Nijmegen lay in ruins from a night of Allied bombing, when the Lancasters and Halifaxes missed the train station and wiped out 800 locals. The Germans described the air raid as wanton destruction of the city, and it turned the population against Montgomery's men long before the first Sherman tank rolled into the streets. Keith lost his best buddy, George, on the first day of Operation Market Garden as XXX Corps entered the city. On September 19th, 1944, the road in had been a beautiful walk. The trees were full and bursting with that last fine moment that marks the apex of a long, hot summer. Keith and George could see the humpback of the bridge up ahead, and its girders spanned the river. There was no resistance to their progress. The clack of the tank treads, and the sounds of the men talking amongst themselves gave the entry into Nijmegen an air of a country hike, more like a training exercise. As they passed one house, a man rushed out from his front door with glasses of ale for them and offered the two pals a toast as liberators and saviors. Another woman ran up and hugged them both. It was a beautiful day. George shouldn't have died the way he did. Well, that's the beginning of, in fact, Toast Soldiers. And the next sort of little portion I want to read is from a story called The Ghosts. Now, the background for The Ghosts is again, this is a true story. I love to work from the position of factual fiction in my stories, if I can. It's just a process of building on reality and taking, what is known and then making what is known into something that is, I suppose, fictional in its own right, that takes on its own life. During the First World War, and I checked this out with friends in Hong Kong, the story was published in the Hong Kong Review and was nominated for a Pushcart Prize by the editor there, Tony Huang. During the First World War, the British Army decided that they were going to basically enlist upwards of 85,000 Chinese workers. They were told they were going to be soldiers. They loaded them secretly . There we go. So I'm back. I disappeared for a second. So it happens, Now you see me, now you don't, sort of thing. Anyways, the British basically loaded upwards of 83, maybe possibly more, thousand Chinese workers into their into cattle boats in Hong Kong, and they shipped them across the Pacific Ocean to Canada, where they were loaded onto cattle cars, and they stood up literally all the way across the country. And by the time they made it to England, there were only 70,000 of them left. Over the course of the next while, what happened was that they weren't given guns, because the British officers thought they might be turned against them, and they became work battalions that were put to work. Well, the Russians also may have enlisted 125,000, none of whom were ever heard from again. So this story is about three of the Chinese members of the Canadian Labour Battalions, who are, in 1922 of all things, still clearing ordnance from a field, and they run across a Ming vase that has been shattered and buried, and they decide that the point of their friendship is that they're going to try to reassemble the vase and so forth. This is from The Ghosts. Everywhere they go, the ghosts leave their footprints on the earth, Tan said as he dug around a landmine, while Quan and Sin stood by and watched. Gently moving the edge of a bayonet around the device, he removed a layer of mud. This one has been here a while, he said, looking up and smiling, then wiped his forehead with an arm that held the weapon. The bayonet was his. The labor units were only only issued shovels without rifles. And there was absolutely no reason why they should have something attached to the end of a weapon, Major Jolliffe explained. Jolliffe didn't last long. He'd been followed by Hobart, then Carruthers, then Miller, and now the young Bingsley, who wanted to be home and rid himself of his Asians, as he called them. The truth behind the Labour battalion's lack of rifles was that their officers simply didn't trust them. At least that's what Quan said when the Chinese diggers in uniforms, but not entitled to call themselves soldiers, had moved through the trenches and collected the bodies of the fallen. They were unable to defend themselves against the enemy. They made pikes and used their shovels as weapons, but such things were useless against munitions. Quan kept count of how many Chinese he had buried in the Canadian cemeteries. The Chinese dead were kept to one corner of the memorial grounds, their own place, as Major Jolliffe said. At least their headstones were of the same white marble as the others. Their names were known only unto God or those who could read Mandarin. Most of the laborers were Cantonese. Sin took the mine from Atan's hands and carried it over to a length of lumber where the other mines were lined, lined the boards like pies. Like pies cooling on an afternoon breeze. Someone else from their battalion would come and detonate them later. Where's the next one? Sin asked. Quan shrugged. Sin was not good at finding them, only at unburying them. During the course of the day, as they worked their way across the shell-pocked field, half of a mile outside of Ypres, they uncovered 3 tons of salvage, metal mostly, steel, some brass, a dozen unexploded 10-inch shells that were probably German because, as the war lingered, the munitions workers lost heart and few shells exploded. They had uncovered an entire tank, but were told by their CO, Bingsley, that unless they could smell bodies inside, it wasn't worth the effort to dig it out. Well, asked Bingsley. Quan shrugged as if to say, well, what? He pretended he had trouble with English when it suited him, although he knew exactly what was being said whenever one of the ghosts opened their mouth. Quan had been a cook in Vancouver for 16 years, arriving in Canada too late for the hard work of railway construction or the suicidal missions of explosive handlers. Both the Pacific and national routes were complete, but the mystique of the trains drew him to the rails. He was good at cooking. The Canadian Pacific gave him a job in a kitchen car of a passenger train. And then, for the usual reasons of someone resenting the Chinese taking jobs that whites could do, he ended up as in a maintenance caboose and found himself kicked and beaten daily by the navvies on the Caribou Run. When the war came, Quan worked in the laundry at the training camp in Penticton, and after sweating himself to dehydration, volunteered for the Ghost Patrol, the brigade that did the heavy labor that was considered beneath the dignity of the average Canadian soldier. Well, the story goes on to, in fact, chronicle what they find, and they find a beautiful Ming vase that is decorated in butterflies and so forth. So the final thing I want to read to you is from a story titled Jenny, which is later on, quite near the end of the book. I had an uncle who was a prospector by trade, and early on, this was in the 1930s, he and another prospector bought a Curtis Jenny, and they flew in and out of the Northern Lakes. And I can remember my uncle telling me there is nothing like sleeping out on an Arctic lake underneath stars. And if you are sleeping under the stars, literally what you are doing is you can look up and you can see the Northern Lights, and you can hear the Northern Lights. And he insisted that you could hear them. It's only recently that Finnish scientists, for example, have been able to find out that the Northern Lights do, in fact, make sounds and so forth. So this is Jenny, and this is a story about the prospector who has managed, in fact, to crash his plane and so forth. Anyways, I'll begin just after the first paragraph. He refused to die that night or the night after. And when he thought he would fall asleep, the Arctic sky clapped him awake. He'd heard legends about the sounds emanating from the aurora. The stories were true. The Northern Lights really did make sounds. He would wait for someone to find him. He couldn't fly out. The tank in his Jenny was empty, and the oil in her engine congealed in the frigid temperature. Her body lay twisted in the snow, and one wing drooped as if it was an injured bird. Everything in the cold and dark told him that he was going to die. And why shouldn't he? He'd done everything wrong in preparing for the Jenny's flight. Hugh Denver had been with him. Hugh Denver had been with him on the flight, but the bushman hung back and begged off because his wife had just given birth to a son. Shortly before he took off from the frozen surface of Kildare Lake, Hugh had appeared at the hut they used for sorting specimens and pulling elk hides. The business of his business partner, a large bearded bush hand who knew nowhere better than anyone who knew him nowhere better than anyone had, held his newborn son wrapped in a Hudson's Bay blanket. The child's hands were pale and delicate and reminded him of a crayfish they found in the lakes where they set down during the thawed months. The excitement over the baby and the gulps of grog to celebrate the son's arrival. He neglected to collect his charts, though they weren't really maps, but someone's guess of what might lie beyond the edge of the known world. Hugh once joked that the cartographer could draw a lake no one had seen, and there would be people hovering in the deckled edges of photographs the following summer. The Northern Lights held such spectacles. Hugh asked if it wouldn't be wise to wait a week or two, but he had replied that the winter would be deeper by then, and the Carswell brothers, their competitors in the find and stake game for the rumored goldfields in the area, would probably have registered their claims by then. The Carswells had gone by snowshoe for more than 2 weeks, and might well be sitting on their superfines by now. He told Hugh that the Jenny would cut his travel to nothing, and he'd wave as he flew over the trudging competitors to dip a wing, some gesture that would break the Carswells' hearts. Hugh and he had purchased the Jenny from a war surplus yard. She wasn't in the best shape. The gum skin on her left wing was torn. The connecting rod between the cockpit and the right rudder had snapped. Hugh asked the yard keeper why that particular plane hadn't been purchased as a crop duster or a barnstormer or a training aircraft. The yard keeper simply shrugged. They'd been assured that the Jenny hadn't seen combat duty, though when they took the engine apart, Hugh pointed out the synchronization mechanism for a front-mounted Vickers machine gun. The machine had been a weapon. On closer inspection, they found the screw holes from the mounting of a Lewis gun swivel on the rear compartment. The aft seat had also been turned around, and the underside of the body had been patched. The thought that the plane had seen active duty only added to an aura of luck and fortitude that the plane held. He told his friend, after all, someone had given her a happy landing. There was a man on Great Slave Lake who also owned a Jenny, but after his crash, he stayed on the ground and was only too happy to sell a pair of greenhorn prospectors, a pair of pontoons, and a set of skis for their plane. Between landing on water and landing on snow or ice, there was nowhere they couldn't go. That gear in itself would give them a major advantage over the Carswells. He joked to Hugh that there'd be no more paddle blisters on their palms. They retrofitted baskets and hanger racks on the fuselage. One could carry a canoe, and the other to carry their supplies. They could survive in the bush for weeks, and if the pickings got slim, they could simply fly out. The area where the tree line peters out to meet the Arctic tundra is deceiving, especially if winter arrives early, which it did in September 1939. How could he have been so distracted by the baby, Hugh's baby, and the desire to beat the Carswells to the other side of Great Slave, that he'd neglected to pack enough supplies? There was snow on the ground. Being alone, he thought, would have its benefits. He would enjoy the vistas, the deep indigo horizon, and the rises and falls in the terrain below, without Hugh interrupting him to point out things that he didn't want to see. But what he met up with as he flew over the lake took him entirely by surprise. And the character in the story, the protagonist in the story, looks up at the northern lights as a kind of ribbon. And instead of just seeing the lights, he sees a kind of a film unfolding, which tells the story of his future life. And he doesn't know what it means because he hasn't lived his life yet. The same uncle of mine was one of the people who found Elliott Lake, which is the major uranium mine deposit north of the Trans-Canada Highway and north of the North Shore of Lake Huron, where my wife was born and where she grew up and so forth. And apparently on the way inland, as they were crossing a swamp, my aunt lost her rubber boot in the swamp. It got sucked off of her foot, and no amount of tugging, no amount of pulling would allow them to retrieve this rubber boot. So my aunt made my uncle carry her on his back all the way out back to the North Shore of Lake Huron. But he sent his Geiger counter on with his friends, and his Geiger counter found Elliott Lake. And at one point years ago, my wife and I, before the museum burned and everything was lost, my wife and I went to the museum in Elliott Lake, and we saw my wife's Geiger counter, my uncle's Geiger counter, and my aunt, who was quite elderly at the time, says, "I want you to go back there and tell them you want that machine back. It's expensive." And of course, it had found this great uranium deposit, which was the center of the Canadian nuclear industry. So there you have it. There you have Toast Soldiers. What is key to the book is that not all the stories are about soldiers. The Ovid has a wonderful quote, and I use it as an epigraph. He says, "Every lover is a soldier." And if the characters are anything in Toast Soldiers, they are lovers. They're people who are in love with others. They're people who are in love with the world. They're in love with what they do. And to be a toast soldier and is not just simply to have pieces of toast handed to you in the morning, but toast soldiers are unique pieces of toast. They're cut in strips. And it was one morning my wife and I went for brunch at a downtown Barrie restaurant, and they didn't have toast on the menu, but served with eggs. They had Toast Soldiers. And I can remember asking the person in charge behind the counter, I said, "What is a toast soldier?" And he cooked me up a free plate of Toast Soldiers and so forth. And I was intrigued that these things were named after soldiers and so forth. That there's a sense of almost like I suppose, sustenance that appears behind each of these characters. And the question is, what keeps them going? And the simple answer is they're curious about life. They're curious about facing challenges and how they meet those challenges and how they manage to overcome those challenges in some small ways. So that the life is about basically the small victories that we fight. So there you have it. There is Toast Soldiers, and I hope you will. In fact, I'm trying to get it there. I'm hoping you will, in fact, enjoy the book if you can. It makes a great Christmas present, and it's just a little taste of what's going on in the book. There are stories about all sorts of things, including concussion. I was in a car accident a number of years ago, and I suffered a concussion. There's a story that's set in Las Vegas in the early days. There's a story which is about my father making a rink in the garden, and there's also the story of someone who was a photographer before the First World War, and all of his sort of romanticized images end up becoming paintings in a greenhouse, and it's the same fate that was endured by Matthew Brady's glass negatives and so forth, just after the Civil War. So there you have Toast Soldiers. I'm hoping it has enough in it to keep people interested and so forth. I just also want to thank Nicholas Ruddick for his reading and his feedback. I noticed that Nicholas is joined us tonight, and I just want to say hi and thank you. And it's just great to see you all. And as I say, there are people that I have known over the years who are present tonight. My sister Carolyn, I believe, is watching. Peter Harastovic from Windsor. I see Peter. It's kind of like romper room, I see so and so. Tracy Sands is here. I taught Tracy at the University of Windsor. Keith Garabian is here, and I'm currently trying to edit a book of essays on Keith's work. Beverly Wicks, who I taught in the Laurentian at Georgian program, is here. Dean Tweed, who I know in Ottawa, who was a student of mine at the SCS, is here. And Mary Whitaker, who I got to know. She was the program assistant for the Laurentian Georgian program, and we used to put together evenings like this. So I appreciate how much work goes into this, and I want to again make sure that I thank Julianne and Abby for all their hard work. So anyways, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Bruce. That was wonderful. It's always a pleasure to hear you read, and especially from your new book of short stories. So in a couple of minutes, we're going to turn things over to the audience. So if anyone has a question they would like to share with us, you can get that ready. If you're comfortable, you'll be able to, just ask the question, or else you can type it into the chats. But just before we get to that, I would like to announce the winners of 3 more copies of Toast Soldiers. And these winners hopefully are still here watching. The winners are Dave Gregory, Beverly Wicks, and Jenny Gunn. And I will send you a message in the comments with my email so I can get your information, and we'll be able to send you those copies. And congratulations to the winners. And I'll turn things back over to Abby to get on with the Q&A. So congratulations, everyone.
I should mention my mother's watching, and she's waving at me. So I'm waving back at my mom, who's 92, and she's doing quite well. And hi, Mom, sort of thing. So anyways, there you go.
Always time to wave at Mom, always time. But we will be getting into our Q&A session with Bruce. So if anybody has any questions you would like to ask, now is the time. You can either write your question in the chat and I will read it out for you, or if you feel comfortable, you can raise your hand and turn on your mic, or you can just turn on your mic and say your question. I'm sure Bruce is very eager to answer any questions you might be having about Toast Soldiers or just his writing process in general.
It's funny, I came to short stories late. For years I was writing poetry, and I'm still writing poetry, of course, but the odd thing was that whenever I tried to talk to someone years ago about writing short stories, they'd get all kind of mystical about it, as if I had asked for, sort of the book of spells from Hogwarts or something like that. And I said, well, what's going on in a short story? Oh, you have to learn the craft of the story. And I'm going, Really? And so when I eventually started writing stories, there's not as much to remember about the craft of writing a story as there is about the craft of poetry, where you have a much larger and much more, profuse workbench. And you have to have a lot more tools that you have to try to, manage. And in the case of writing stories, it's just like we all share stories. It's one of the things we all do on a continuous basis in our daily lives. And I just decided, well, okay, how do people tell stories? And I started listening in a particular way to my own family. I was very fortunate to grow up in a family where people sat around the dining room table, for Sunday dinners and so forth, and they told stories. And I would listen to how they told the stories, and I thought, wow, okay, this is something I could do. So I got into writing short stories, and now I'm an addicted, fiction maker, as well as an addicted writer. But don't mention that to my wife. I get physically ill if I can't write. But I constantly feel I want to be working on something every day, and stories pop into my head because I see the characters, I see the setting, I see sometimes I see them doing something. In the case of the ghosts, I saw these three guys who didn't have helmets on, but they were in Canadian greatcoats from the First World War, and they were down on their knees and they were poking at something in the ground. And I sort of, visually, in my imagination, I walked up to them and started looking at them, and they were in fact digging up bombs from the First World War. And I thought, isn't that interesting? I wonder who they are. And suddenly they started telling me the story. Well, I'd also coincidentally had encountered a photograph of the Canadian Chinese work battalions. And you probably noticed in the photographs that they were very ill-equipped, and they had nothing to fight with. And then there's also I noticed also when I started looking at graveyards from the First World War, war cemeteries, I started noticing that there were corners of the different memorial fields that were entirely in Chinese. And I thought, how did we get what are the Chinese doing there? I thought they weren't really permitted in the First World War to join the Canadian Army. Some of them did, of course, but so I became fascinated by that. And so it's weird, where stories come from. There's usually some sort of odd little tidbit or crumb of something that enters my mind. And I just think, gee, I wonder what that connects to. And I wonder what the connection connects to. And the story sort of goes from there. So.
Yeah, and we have some questions in the chat. The first one from Mac, who is actually one of the students in the publishing practicum that helped publish Grace of Falling Stars. And he would like to know, sort of relating back to what you were just speaking about, how much of the ideas for your stories do you draw from personal experience or those from people that you know?
Sometimes they're drawn from people I know. Sometimes they're drawn from something I learn. Sometimes they're, I don't know, out of nowhere. Story Badlands, which is set in Las Vegas at the end of the Second World War, just as Vegas is taking off. I have no idea where that popped into my head, but I saw this guy in sort of a pale, sort of, cream-colored suit, and he's balding and slightly portly, and he's got a hand that won't quite function because it was badly burned, and his wife shoots him. And although I moved that later on in the story, I thought originally the story opened with, and she shot me, and I thought, wow, that's an interesting thing. Who is this guy? And it turns out he's telling his story, and but it's not just the story. One of the things that I'm constantly looking for is the way in which the stories connect to larger sort of motifs. And of course, in the case of the story Badlands, it's about wandering in the desert, a pillar of smoke by day and the pillar of fire by night. In the case of the story Ogilvy, I had read a quote of Tolstoy's, which says there's two stories. And one story is someone decides to leave. And the other story is a stranger suddenly appears in town. And Tolstoy says that's all there is to it. Dostoevsky says there's stories about love and there's stories about death. But I got fascinated by this whole idea of somebody coming back to town after they'd been away from town for most of their life. And why did they return? Well, because the guy's a washed up boxer, but his name is Ogilvy. The story's called Ogilvy, and and the town is called Ogilvy, and he comes back and nobody knows him. But the story, rather than just being about a guy returning, is about the latter books of the Odyssey, basically the books 18 to 24 of the Odyssey, which is the homecoming. And I had to throw in the dog, the little dog called Argus, who belongs to Odysseus, and he takes one look at the old dog, and the old dog recognizes him and goes, and falls over. It's Homeric dark humor at its best, but the dog falls over, and suffers from a seizure, and it's like the puppy, sort of thing. And the puppy says, "Where have you been all my life?" Sort of thing. "You're back, and I'm so glad to see you." And so it's weird what feeds a story. There's one story called Toy Soldiers, and I started thinking about concussions. I was in a car accident and I suffered a very serious concussion in 2016, I guess it was. And no, I wasn't able to read for 4 months. And writing was, in fact, something else entirely. And the letters scattered on the page and everything like that. And it was very, very weird. And of course, it all came back eventually. But it's about someone who suffers a concussion. And what does he do? Well, he paints toy soldiers, and he literally builds his own little quote British empire out of toy soldiers. And I practiced that as a hobby at one point too, because but I found that it wasn't as productive as writing short stories. Yeah.
Amazing. So we have a couple more questions in the chat. We have one from Tracy Sands. Does your brain ever stop? The sheer array of ideas is overwhelming. Do you ever feel like you ever might be running out of ideas?
Sorry, I just lost Abby's feed, but do I ever, here's the problem. My wife makes me sleep in a different room. Why? Because I sleep with a lap desk next to my bed, and in the middle of the night, I turn on the light and I'm busy writing something. And my daughter, will be trundling back and forth to the bathroom. "What are you doing up?" And I said, I got an idea for something, and it has to come out. And so I'm constantly writing things. It's I consider it just part of what I do. So does my brain ever stop? I don't know. I hope not. I think if it did, I think I wouldn't know where I was and so forth. I'm already suffering from temporal displacement, but I think that's a result of the pandemic. So I'm not sure what day it is, and so forth. And I have to ask people, what's today, and they tell me, or I check my cell phone, they tell me what's today. But as far as the ideas, there's constantly things that are sneaking up on me, and yet I can never tell where the story is going to come from. It could come from a song. It could come from, like I wrote one recently, which is based on a song that was done by Dusty Springfield and written by Burt Bacharach in the 1960s, very early 60s. And it was a major hit over in England. And it's called 24 Hours from Tulsa. And it's one of those songs that's completely forgotten now. But I had started writing the story and then suddenly heard the song and I thought, wait a sec, I know this story because I've already written it at the beginning of this story, 24 Hours from Tulsa. And of course, what's the result? Well, I build in the actual song and tell the story of the song and so forth. But I'd already pictured the motel and somebody stopping for the night, being attracted by the lights. And there's a kind of a rusty fixture outside of this rundown motel. And I thought, okay, so was a woman stepping out of a room. And what's wrong with the woman? Well, her dress is torn, and she's fleeing from somebody. And that's where the story, it's one of those things that's waiting on deck in another, manuscript. I think Lewis has this one. And but it's called 24 Hours from Tulsa. And I was kind of surprised when I started taking a look at the lyrics, because I thought, hey, that's the story already that I was already seeing, So I don't know where they come from. They come from everything. And the key thing is, if you're writing, you're constantly permitting the world to speak to you in some way. I don't want to use the phrase "things talk to me" because that kind of raises psychological suspicions, but it's the idea that if you're paying attention, things are wanting to be noticed. There's a sense that they want to be noticed, and that's where stories come from.
Amazing.
And so pick up on. So.
Thank you, Bruce. And I believe we have time for one more question. And Lewis asked a really amazing question that we'd like to end it on. So what is the source of the strength with which your characters face the difficulties they do? Many stories out there presenting morally degraded characters facing morally challenging circumstances. In Toast Soldiers, however, the characters face these circumstances with dignity. What is their secret?
That's all they got, when you, what's that, there's a line, is it a Bruce Springsteen line or is it a Rolling Stone line? It's when you ain't got nothing, you got nothing to lose. Well, the last thing they've got to lose is that little shred of dignity that defies complete defeat. And I'm fascinated by the idea of people sort of, standing their ground based upon what's left of them. And it's life's a battle at best. And because it is a battle, there's a question of, well, what remains? And the simple answer is, what remains is that little shred of possibility, and they pursue it, And if you pursue the shred of possibility, there's no guarantee you're going to win, you're going to have a positive outcome. But the idea is you tried, And I like to think that my characters are individuals who refuse to run up a white flag, and I know, in some people, some of you know that I am not easily defeated by things like online letter submission forms, or for technical problems and things like that. And I will, like a maniac, I will stay up all night trying to solve them. And why? Because it's like no, there's a solution to all this, and it's not that life's a code, but life's a puzzle, and you want to find the solution to it. So
Yeah, absolutely. You've always had such a talent for bringing out the most beautiful and the most graceful moments in the darkest areas of humanity. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you everybody for sharing your questions. We had a few more in the chat, but unfortunately we're running out of time. All good things must come to an end, and so this brings us to the end of our night. I would like to thank our guest speakers, Louis and Marty, for taking the time out of their busy schedules to appear and say a few words. I would also like to thank all of the authors that were featured in our teaser video, Antonia, Ben, and Rosanna. Your kind words are truly appreciated. Of course, we must thank Bruce for writing this remarkable collection of short stories in the first place. His storytelling abilities never fail to amaze everybody in the room. Finally, we would like to thank you, the audience, for being with us tonight to celebrate Canadian literature and honor one of the best authors in the country. We hope you enjoyed the launch this evening. Again, congratulations to our 5 giveaway winners. We will be reaching out to you very soon to ensure that you receive your signed copy of Toast Soldiers. And as for everybody else, a reminder that there is a discount on Crownsest Books website for the next 24 hours for 50% off. And if you miss that, a 25% discount for the next 2 weeks. So don't miss out on this incredible offer. Go to Crownsest Books website right now with the link in the chat and purchase Toast Soldiers. Thank you all again. Goodbye and have a great night.
Thank you.